A very good afternoon to all our Millennium Mams. Today we have with us a very special guest and a stalwart of the Indian economy. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Dharmakirti Joshi, to our forum. We all are students and knowledge seekers at Millennium Mams. And when leaders like you come to our forum, it is like a dream come true for us. Let me tell you briefly about our organization. Millennium Mams is a 30-year-old Kolkata-based not-for-profit organization founded by our mentors, Mr. Vishnu Dhanuka and Mr. Sanjay Bhuwania, with the sole motive of creating financial awareness amongst women. Since then, our organization has multiplied many-fold and has touched lives of over 5,000 women all over the globe, giving them an opportunity to build financial acumen. Our curriculum imparts financial knowledge through the study of current affairs and business dailies, analysis of balance sheets, AGM participation, factory visits, and tracking of global and domestic economic trends. We now have chapters in Bangalore and Mumbai as well. Currently, we have 400 plus active members. Now, I would like to introduce Mr. Joshi to our audience. Mr. Joshi is the chief economist at CRISIL, with 32 years in economic research and consultancy. He leads the economic research agenda and is the primary spokesperson for CRISIL on macroeconomic issues. He was the member of the working group of savings for the 12th five-year plan. He is currently member of working group on revision of wholesale price index set up by Government of India. He is also the member of industry monitoring group of Reserve Bank of India. He is regularly invited for pre-policy consultations with Governor of Reserve Bank of India. He also attended the meeting of Prime Minister with key economists in 2018 and 2019. He has been the part of the faculty that trains senior regulatory officials from South Asian region. He regularly writes for leading newspapers and expresses his views on the economy in the electronic media. At Millennium Mams, we were very inspired by your article, sir, which came on Times of India on 14 January 2022 on the topic of Indian demographic dividend. Mr. Joshi holds a bachelor's and master's degree in economics and has attended programs on macroeconomic policy and management at Harvard University. He is the visiting scholar to Economic Research Unit of University of Pennsylvania. We at Millennium Mams are honored to learn from your immense experience, sir, and your insights on Indian economy. It is an honor for us to host you today at our platform. Now I request Mr. Joshi to enlighten us and share his expertise on Indian economy with us.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. It's indeed a pleasure, and thank you also for your very generous introduction. So let me do a PowerPoint presentation, I think, which is
Yes.
which will take about 30 minutes or so. Please feel free to intervene, and then I think we can have a Q&A session post that.
Okay, sir.
So is that screen visible? I mean, is it?
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I think it's, may I have one kind request? I think I would request people to switch off their, mute their microphones so that I think we can have a undisturbed session. So it's almost 2 years since the pandemic struck. I think in January last year, it was becoming more or last year, it was becoming more or less clear that I think this is something which is going to cause a lot of pain. And we have over a period of time also learned to live with it to some extent. I mean, but every time we see a new variant, I think there is always fear. So let me start off with a small cartoon which appeared just when the Omicron wave started in November. So the first reaction to a new strain of the virus was, well, let's shut the borders. And so what this cartoon is essentially telling that even the countries which the advanced countries like UK, US, European Union, etc. Everybody, the first reaction was to shut the border, not realizing that Omicron was already present in their own economies. And I think now all these countries actually became hotbeds of infection. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that we'll have to now adjust our lives to this new way of living, because COVID is going to be with us for some time, until it eventually becomes a endemic situation where uh, it's like a common flu, so to say. So until that time arrives, I think we'll need to adjust ourselves accordingly to different variants, etc., that come up. So I don't know much about COVID. I think I'm just broadcasting what I hear from the epidemiologists, etc. But I think as we look ahead, I think this is one of the key factors that we will take into consideration, whether we look at the economy or our social interactions, or it is a holiday. So this is going to stay with us at least for foreseeable future. Now, let me, I think, begin my formal session on the economy. And most recently, the central bank, the Reserve Bank of India, came out with the financial stability report, where they said, I think people are interviewed and they tell what is the bigger risk right now. So the risk, I think, between July 21 and December 21, the shift in the risk was towards external environment. So everybody became worried about what is going to happen globally. And I think, how is that going to impact us? So I'll come to that in a minute. So the point is that I think the global economy growth has kind of peaked in 2021. It is now going to slow down because the extraordinary support in the form of very low interest rates, or in the form of spending by the government to support a number of people, I think all that cannot continue indefinitely, and that is now the support is being pulled back. So that means the economies will stabilize at lower levels. What the pandemic has also done is, I think, and this is very important from India's perspective, is that it has exposed the weakness of supply chains. I think the global supply chains were the most talked about before the pandemic struck. We all used to talk about the efficiency it brought, the lean inventories, production, which was just in time, very precision logistics. I think they all worked very well for a very long time, till I think we got a stress scenario from COVID. So now I think, so everything was getting centralized around China. And now I think that the received wisdom is that you need to diversify away from that. So that is China plus one policy. So that is one outcome of the pandemic, where I think India is trying to cash in by trying to have a production linked incentive scheme to prop up its manufacturing sector, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one outcome of the pandemic. I think the other is that what we are seeing currently, if you look at the crude prices, which is the Brent crude oil prices, they are very high. I mean, they're almost $88, $89 to a barrel right now, which hurts us very much, because we import 80% of our requirements, and this also creates inflation. So this is also one global outcome that we need to keep watching as we keep walking deeper and deeper into 2022. And I think the most important aspect is what the US central bank is going to do, the Federal Reserve. This is the most powerful bank in the world. And what it does has ripple effects across the world. And right now it is in a situation where it is going to pull back the support that it gave to the economy, which means they are going to raise interest rates now. The Americans haven't seen high interest rates for the last 10, 11 years. I mean, they're all living. First, there was the global financial crisis that brought the interest rates down. They were trying to normalize it. Then again came the COVID. So Americans in the last 11 to 12 years have only seen very low interest rates. So I think how the society reacts, and whether US is actually will be able to raise interest rates to that extent, I think that's going to be one question from the US perspective. So what happens is when US interest rates go up, the capital starts moving out of emerging markets towards the US and towards the it's called home bias, and that creates fluctuation and volatility in Indian currency for us. It would be, and also I think it creates fluctuations for in the capital flows. So I think that those are the big risks to watch out for. So let me just spend 1 minute trying to explain that, because that's the key risk coming from the global economy. So when we talk about cold or any disease, we say that please build your resilience. I mean, the more vulnerable you will be, the quickly the cold will strike you. So the way to look at how the US actions will impact us is impact means how the capital flows into the country will get impacted, or how the currency will behave. It depends on how vulnerable we are. I mean, is our immunity strong enough or not, and and how strong the shock is. See, sometimes when you are vulnerable, even a small shock can hit you, and that's exactly what happened in 2013. Our current account deficit was very high, growth was kind of slipping, and I think there was a lot of concern on the economy. At that time, the US Fed just said that they might start pulling back some of the extra liquidity that they have given. And immediately, I think the rupee, within a period of 2 months or so, depreciated by 15, 16 or some such number. I mean, there was huge stress that was created by that because our vulnerability was low. Now, this time around, I think it's a different situation. We are not that vulnerable. We have foreign exchange reserves, which are 640, close to $640 billion. We also do not have too much of external debt. So I think we are less vulnerable, but the shock that is coming is a little bigger. I mean, because the US hasn't faced 7% inflation before. After a long time, I mean, after the 80s, it's seeing this. So if the Federal Reserve surprises us, even with some better resilience, we might still see a lot of capital account volatility, which means money might flow out and currency might behave, and that will have impact on equity markets and everywhere, so to say. So I think that's the basic point I wanted to make from the global side. Then I'll now switch on to what's happening in India. So these are the three waves of COVID. The yellow parts that you see is how many cases per day did you see, and the brown line is how stringent the lockdown was. So this is done by the Oxford University for all the countries. So I'm taking it as a reference point. So the first wave was like Sahyadri Mountains, or I mean a small hillock. But the lockdown was very stringent. I mean, as can be seen from the stringency index, it was close to 100. Second wave was like Mount Everest. I mean, it went up very sharply, but the stringency was less than the first wave. So we managed to adjust dial ourselves according to the virus to some extent, although the healthcare was badly impacted. The third wave, which is still playing out, I think it's like Burj Khalifa. I mean, it's just going straight up. I mean, that's how it is moving up, and this is how it has moved in other countries. But it has come down also equally sharply. And the lockdowns, which were very stringent during the first, and I think to some extent during the second wave, during the third wave, I think they are not that stringent. So I think the point is we are now learning to live with the virus. Accepting the fact that the vaccines that we have will blunt the virus, but they will not defeat it. They haven't defeated it as yet. So I think, and now I think the only weapon that we have currently against it is the vaccination that we take, and the second is the vaccines that we carry in our pockets, which is our masks. And I think vaccination program, after I think becoming a little, I would say, confident that we had defeated the virus sometimes in early part of 21. I think when the COVID wave hit us, it also pushed the vaccination drive, and I think now vaccinations are proceeding quite well, I would say. I think in the last 7 days, I think we vaccinated around 7 million people per day. So that is the average rate. And so this means I think we are entering into a stage where virus is not going to hit us that hard. So I think these are some of the data points. I don't want to spend too much time on it or bog you down with the details. But the point I wanted to highlight through these data points is that the way we look at the economy has also changed since the pandemic. I think there was nothing called the Google Mobility Indicator before pandemic struck us. But Google decided that since they have the wealth of data of how people are moving to their jobs or to buy stuff out for recreation, they decided to provide this data because this would be an indicator of how things are playing out. And I think so. First one is the Google Mobility Indicator, which I think Google has promised that they will keep doing it till the time the pandemic is over. Interestingly, nobody ever announces when the pandemic is over. I think when the TV stops talking about it, I think it will be over by that time. The mobility, I think you can see the first wave very hard hit, the second wave less hit, and the third wave it's not that much hit. I mean, I think it's still people are moving around. I think they are going to their offices, etc. Similarly, I think the other indicators, whether it is power consumption or it is manufacturing or services, or it is traffic congestion, or it is the railway freight movement or toll collections, I think all of them are showing that the hit to the economy is not that hard. But I think I also want to point out here that it may not be hard to the aggregate economy, but once you start splicing people into different categories, I think you see the differential impact play out. The rich have not been impacted that much. Their wealth has actually grown very significantly, whereas the people who used to work in contact-based services, it could be a hairdresser, it could be anybody. I mean, all their professions have been hit quite hard. And that I think is creating a new dichotomy, so to say, in the economy. Now, I think, so we economists typically look at GDP data and we try to pick up what is it telling us about where things are moving. So I think I have here 5 components of parts of GDP. One is what we as households consume, which is private consumption. This is about 55–56% of GDP. Then second is what government does, then investments, then exports and imports. I think these are the parts of GDP. So I want to highlight the fact here that for the year 21-22, which is the current fiscal year, we've crossed the pre-pandemic levels, I think, for most, except for private consumption. The private consumption, even in 21-22, is below the level it was in 2019-20, and the share of private consumption has been only declining, I think. So this is a worry, I think, for everyone. Here, I think, because the consumption of services have been hit more than the consumption of goods. So I think this would be an important benchmark to watch out for the Reserve Bank of India, even for the budget that is forthcoming. So I think there is an expectation that government will try to help support private consumption in the economy. So there is other way to look at it is, okay, what are the goods produced in the economy, not what that. And here I think if you look at financial services, if you look at public administration, which is essentially government, I think they are all doing fine. I mean, but as far as the contact intensive services are concerned, which is trade, hotels, airlines, tourism, what have you, I think their share in GDP is continuously falling. And I think even in the current fiscal year, it is about 8.5% lower than what it was in 2019-20. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that it's very obvious what has been hit and what has not been hit. And I think so the policy has to be geared towards supporting the areas that have been hit to some extent. So how do we know how confident the consumers are? That is done via a number of surveys that are conducted. I think RBI does it, and number of other bodies also do it. So if you see the confidence of consumers, so here there are actually two lines. One is the future expectations, which is the blue one year ahead expectation, and the red one is the current situation. So if you see, I think the confidence in the last few months, I think, has improved. But if you look at the pre-pandemic period, which is 2019, I think people are still less confident, I think, on consumption than they were during 2019-20, for instance. I think compared to the consumers, the businesses are more confident. And I think the larger companies have managed to shed their debt. They have improved their financial profiles. They have consolidated. They are doing. They managed to pass on the input cost increases faster than the smaller companies. So the business confidence, I think, has really picked up. I mean, much faster than consumer confidence. That is one of the reasons why private consumption is weaker and investment is still better. I mean, although private investment is very slow to pick up, but the ability to invest is much higher as far as the investments are concerned. But the ability to consume is lower comparatively, particularly for the lower income brackets. Similarly, I think other thing which is happening, which everyone needs to keep in mind, is that the costs have gone up very significantly. One, because of the COVID protocol. I think you need, if a hotel has to give a room to someone, I think they'll have to clean it thoroughly, spend more time cleaning it, then keep it vacant for not for 2 hours, but maybe for 20 hours. So all those things are pushing the costs up. And the manufacturing costs have gone up because steel is 40% more expensive than it was last year. Similarly, aluminum is maybe 40-45% more expensive. So your refrigerators, your automobiles, everything is becoming, I think the input costs are rising. So that is getting passed on to the, so some car prices you might have seen have risen of late. This is, I think the interesting part is that this is not limited to manufacturing, but it's also happening in the services sector, which is the hotel. I gave an example. It's also happening in infrastructure, because if steel becomes expensive, it's going to be more expensive to construct a bridge, for instance, which uses steel. So I think there is a all-pervasive increase in the costs, which unless the global prices come down next year, which I think there is a divided view. I think some believe they will come down, other believe that it's going to be still high. So unless they come down, I think this cost pressure on the economy is not going to come down. The employment is the other part, which I think I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I just want to highlight the fact that the two sectors which are not doing well, which is one of them is trade, hotels, transport, and communication. I think in this sector, the labor intensity is higher than in the manufacturing sector. If you compare it, these contact-based service to manufacturing, they employ more person per million worth of output than manufacturing, and this is not doing well at all. So I think clearly this segment, people who are working in these segments are not doing well. I mean, and that's getting reflected in consumption. Also, I think the construction part is barely 1.2%. GDP in construction is only 1.2% above the 2019-20 level. So what it means is that the most labor-intensive sector in the economy after agriculture is not able to absorb enough people. I mean, so that means I think there is a hit to, and both these categories, I think the lower decile, the lower part of the population, lower income categories have been hit more than the upper one. Now coming to our, so I initially mentioned, I think this is more of data. I don't want to spend more time on it, but I think the point I want to highlight is that if you look at the first row, which is the current account deficit, which means that how much money we have to, we require, dollars we require to service the external obligations apart from the debt, I think this is all in the green. So that's why I said we are less vulnerable. Similarly, the amount of foreign exchange reserve we have can cover has much more coverage ratio than I think it had in the year 2013. So it was able to support foreign exchange reserves or short-term debt to the tune of 1.6, which means that the coverage ratio, which is ratio of reserves divided by short-term debt and the other short-term obligations, was 1.6. Now it is 7.5. I think the point is, without getting into the numbers, is that our ability, we have enough foreign exchange reserves to take care of some of the volatility in the currency market. We don't, no country has indefinite reserves, but we are in better prepared than we were in 2012-13. These are our numbers. I mean, forecasts. I don't know how much value this would have for you, but for next year, I think we expect GDP growth at 7.8%. And this here, the assumption behind this is that the COVID will lie low in the next coming fiscal year. The third wave will end by April for sure, and next year we should see a more smoother sail, I think, compared to this year. Though I think the risk of COVID continues to be there. There will be more variants because about 50 countries in the world have vaccination below 6%, which means that less than 6% of the population has been vaccinated in those countries. And this virus doesn't know any boundaries. And so if it emerges in one part of the world, it can very quickly spread to the other also. So that risk always remains. So I think so. I think so. What kind of damage this has done from a long-term perspective? So if you look at the GDP growth, I said 9.5 was our projection. Now I think CSO says 9.2. So we are also adjusting it lower to close to 9%. But next year 7.8, then a little slowdown because the services will get a kick in FY23, but they can't get the same kind of kick because it's like starting from zero to a certain level of activity. So services, broad basing of the economy should complete in FY23, and then we should revert to our historical levels of 6 to 6.5 to 7%, depending on how various things that the government is doing play out. And I think what the pandemic has done is it has pushed us back by almost 1 year. If there was no pandemic, GDP would have been moving around this blue line that you see, but because we had a pandemic, we saw GDP growth shrink by close to 7.3% in FY20. So as a result of that, I think we will never be able to catch up with where we should have been. I mean, so this gap from the blue line and the red line is around 10% of GDP. So that, I think, in technical jargon, we treat it as a permanent loss. So it's not that we cannot bridge this gap. We can, but if we grow at something like 12-13% per annum per year for the next 3-4 years, then I think we will be back to the pre-COVID trend. We have crossed the pre-COVID level, but we haven't reached the pre-COVID trend level. I mean, so I think that it's a little technical. So we'll be happy to discuss it if there's any interest. So from the budget that is forthcoming, we expect a flexible approach. They should not rush to reducing the deficit. I think if they want to still support the economy, which there is need to support, so they will have to ensure that they very gradually reduce the level of deficit so that they have more money to support economic activities. They have to support the infrastructure cycle because private sector has the money to invest, but they don't have the confidence, and the sentiment is not that strong that they will start immediately investing. So I think from that perspective, government will have to do the heavy lifting. And I think we do believe that schemes like rural employment guarantee scheme, etc., have played a good role, and they also create assets. It's not a free giveaway. I mean, so it's not like putting money in your bank account. It is using people to create some assets. I think so. If productive assets are created, it will help. Urban part of the poor also needs some similar support, but I think this has been recommended by the committee of the parliamentarians also, but let's see whether government does it or not. And they need to push up construction activity, because that's the most labor intensive activity in the economy. Construction means housing and related and infrastructure related, rural roads and so on. So now what has this, I think, so let's think a little bit about what the pandemic has done and to us. Well, I think from the point of view of allocating resources, I think we'll have to keep in mind that pandemics can occur again. I mean, and they might occur much faster than we have seen previously. And reason, and the global climate change also contributes to the pandemics, the pandemic risk. So all companies, whether it is government, I think you'll need very short response time. I mean, to any exigency. I think so. You'll have to have much robust systems. Manufacturing companies, as I said, will have to focus on diversification, particularly the global companies. So that might bring some business to us also. Businesses, I think corporates like us, I think will have to pay more emphasis on the health strategy of the employees. I mean, it's become very critical now. This implies that the focus on sustainability of the activity will become more important. Resilience will become more important than merely looking at the quarterly profits. And I think healthcare segment is I think it requires a wake-up call. We all know the status of our healthcare system. I think that will see what was happening in the last few years is that we were becoming very focused on the lifestyle diseases. I mean, which is right also. Heart disease, diabetes, these are big problems. But we were less focused on the infectious disease part. Now I think the balance will kind of tilt a little bit towards infectious diseases right now. But I think over the medium run, you'll have to strike a balance, because this risk is very much there. So I think from a medium to long-term perspective, I do see good prospects for India, but all the prospects are dependent on whether the national infrastructure plan which the government has laid out, or the PLI scheme which government is put out for private sector to participate in, whether I think we take advantage of the diversification of supply chains. I think all these factors will shape how the economy moves ahead. But we do have a demographic advantage. I think you mentioned in the beginning that I think on the piece I had done on for Times of India, I think basically India is going to add about 100 million to the workforce over the next 10 years. If we use them productively, I think it turns into a dividend. Otherwise, it remains a burden. And this 100 million is about 22% of the working age population in the world in the next 10 years is going to come from India. So this is a huge opportunity, and it's also a challenge. So let me stop there, and I think we can. I've taken 2 more minutes than I.
No worries, sir. So thank you very much for this enlightening session, sir, for this PowerPoint presentation, sir. Sir, I would like to begin with the Q&A, sir.
Yeah, sure. So let me stop sharing, or it's already stopped.
Sir, it's already stopped, sir.
Okay, good.
Sir, I'll begin with my question first, sir.
Yeah, sure.
So what is your outlook on the Indian economy vis-a-vis the inflation rate, the interest rate, and the GDP growth of India in the coming years, sir?
Yeah, so I think as far as GDP growth is concerned, I think this year 9%, 9.5%, whatever it is, it's over a 7.3 contraction last year. So you have to discount it. I think I think there was a famous economist called Milton Friedman. He called it plucking effect. if you pluck the string of a guitar down, it moves up. So it's the plucking effect that is playing out in the current fiscal year. Beyond this, I think the real, I think the broad basing of the economy, the will all those factors will start coming into play, and that probably will happen from 22-23. So we expect around 7.8% GDP growth, which we are going to revise, of course, after the budget is announced. From there, I think the trajectory will depend on what I told you previously. I think whether all the programs, etc., that we have initiated as a country, if we succeed on it or not, if the geopolitical risks become very large, then I think that will also, geopolitical means, I think, so you seeing what is happening, Russia, Ukraine, all these things have direct or indirect implications for us through commodity prices, etc. So that's on the growth. Inflation is a tricky thing. The expectation of households on inflation is high. I mean, they don't expect inflation to come down for near term or future. And I think the companies want to pass them on. If I want to whitewash my house today, I think I'll have to pay 15 to 20% more than I paid last year. I think Asian Paints or any company, I don't want to name any company, but everybody has, because the input costs have risen there. So wherever it's possible to pass on, they're passing it on. The rich can afford big cars, and I think there is a waiting list for cars which runs up to 8 to 9 months for some of the cars. So I think those categories, they're very easy. They can merrily raise interest rates. They can merrily raise prices. So I think there is a pressure to push the input cost increases to the end consumer, which will continue to play out. Now, I think the as far as interest rates is concerned, I think RBI has been tolerating inflation, I think, which typically they would not. Now, I think they will start raising interest rates. Actually, by the way, even without RBI raising interest rates in the economy are already rising. I mean, if anybody invests in bond markets or looks at government bonds, I think 6 months back, the cost of borrowing for the government was 6% for 10-year paper. It is now 6.6%. So 60 basis point hike is there. And government borrowing is the risk-free rate in the economy. All other rates get added. I mean, there is risk premium over that. So if risk-free rate is rising, other rates will also rise. So I think rates have already started rising. RBI is formally yet to announce, I think, which they probably will announce by April.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. So now I invite Meghna for her question. Meghna.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
You touched upon China +1 in your presentation. So my question is, how will China, so in your opinion, how will China +1 change the landscape of the Indian manufacturing sector?
Well, I think it cannot on its own. It's only one push factor that has come from the global economy. What is happening in China is that I think, as I said, the supply chains were really very efficient, and but they were not very diversified. So now countries are looking for different resources, and under that, I think countries are also looking at moving out of China and setting up shop elsewhere. Now, where they will set up a shop will depend on which is more suitable to them. I mean, in terms of cost of doing business, in terms of other facilities that government gives. I think what we have observed till now is that smaller countries like Bangladesh or even Vietnam, I mean, they have taken away a large share of what goes out of China.
Yes.
Now, how we will do that? So that is why government woke up, and I think they introduced the PLI scheme, the production linked incentive. So you produce something, then you get the incentive. Earlier, it used to be you invest and get the incentive. So people used to invest and then nothing used to happen, and they used to eat the incentive also. So here you have to show the proof of the pudding, and then I think you are able to. Now, I think so this is gaining some traction, particularly in electronics areas. I think so that it will get a push from there. We also need to be less dependent on China for pharmaceutical inputs. I think the key inputs largely come from China. So I think for that also the PLI scheme is helping. And I think also in some other segments like automobile components or the sunrise areas, which are linked to the green economy, which could be your solar panels and stuff like that. So it will create a new form of manufacturing. And the idea is that once you give them support for 5 years, then they will be able to walk on their own after that. I think so. That is how it will. It's expected to help, but it's early days. I mean, so.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Sir, our member Vasundhara has a question on green economy, sir.
Yeah, sure, please.
Sir, there is talk of green economy all over the world, and it is believed to be commercially lucrative also now. So what is your view on India's green economy?
I think they're already. We are moving towards. We have already committed to COP. In the Ireland conference, I think we already committed to a certain path for achieving that, and the corporate sector also is becoming more sensitive to that, because the more green tilted you are, the better prospects that the foreigners will put money in your company or will buy your bonds. So I think it's becoming it's like a I think it's like a factor which is going to push the economy towards more sustainable path, but it's also going to raise the cost of doing business initially. I think if you move too fast, then you disrupt the existing system. What has happened in Europe? I mean, they were, I think, too bullish on the moving towards green energy, etc. The energy costs have increased by almost 2 times. I mean, they're facing huge inflation pressure from energy costs, and that too in the winter months. So we have to chalk out a very gradual path towards that. But it's very clear that whether it is environment or it's social or it is governance, ESG as we call it, I think these aspects will become a critical determinant of whether people put money in your company or not, because it will be perceived as a risk going ahead. I mean, risk in the sense that suppose there's a polluting company which is making a lot of money right now, and I think the shares are moving up. But if government comes with a regulation suddenly that this will be taxed, or I think this cannot be done, then suddenly you are exposed to a new risk. So people will start factoring that risk. So it will divert investments towards more green. So that's why funding will also become available. So these are my initial thoughts. I think it's a very dynamic area, but we need to be careful about how we tread this path. I think we can't rush into it, so to say.
Thank you, sir.
I invite Shweta Singhal for her question.
Good afternoon, sir. A little question on a different topic, sir. Agriculture in general in India is not coming up and suffering. And PM has made a target of doubling farmers' income. Recently, after withdrawing of the 3 farm laws, is it possible according to you? And if yes, how?
Well, I think even with farm laws, the incomes wouldn't have doubled. I mean, see, the farmer is, if the farmer's income were rising, there would be no need to put money into their accounts, I think, under PM Kisan. I think that's an admittance of the fact that the farmer income is not rising. If you look at the cost that the farmer is facing, when oil prices go up, naphtha prices go up, fertilizer prices also, I think, go up, pesticide prices also go up. So the cost pressure is also there. So I think for a farmer, the doubling of his income can only happen when I think the farmer diversifies, has instruments so that he can or he or she can hedge themselves. By hedging, I mean either it could be through the forward market that you discover the price, or it could be that you have crop insurance, etc., so that in case I think there is a flood, or I mean there is any calamity, you can recover your cost, right? So I think so. These are the building blocks, I think. So then I think if you create markets, I think then the markets will also flourish. But if the basic building blocks are not there, then I think the risk is that the farmer is, I just want to give you one example. I mean, I have a friend, I mean, who used to work in the corporate sector and became a farmer later on. And he's a farmer who already has his income secured. I mean, so he's already earned his money. It's just shockier. So this guy was telling me that the tomato, if it sells at 50 rupees per kg in the market, the farmer only gets about 10 rupees a kg. Now, look at the profile of risk and look at the profile of return. Farmer is growing the tomato, is taking the risk of weather, taking the risk of pests, everything. And he's getting a very low price. And that also can reduce if there is a glut in the market. Whereas the middleman who's moving the stuff from his farm to the market is making 40 rupees or 30 rupees per kg. Now he's only taking the risk that some part of the tomato will get destroyed. Now you tell me, is this okay? I mean, will this work?
Not at all.
This cannot. So the farm laws were in a way in a way they were towards addressing this. But I think there are other components of the agriculture which need to be addressed before I think you can completely open the market. Markets are always exploited. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Even the forward markets in US, the Chicago board, etc., when they had opened earlier, they were supposed to a lot of manipulation. I think which the solution is not to shut the market, but to make it more efficient. But at the same time, I think you need to empower I mean, there are many things that can be done. Agriculture is a completely, I think it's changing in its texture, in its composition. People are talking of vertical farms now. I think, I don't know much about
Hydroponics.
Yeah, hydroponics and others. I mean, so they'll be straight instead of horizontal, it will be vertical. All those things are also coming up. So farming is going through a lot of changes, but I think some basics are required. I mean, because dal, roti, I think it can't be grown hydroponically. I mean, it will still be grown. It's a interesting question, but I think there's a lot to talk about within agriculture. I just highlighted a few points.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. I invite Pooja for a question.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good
Sir, as you
afternoon.
mentioned, dal roti, sir, my question is regarding the investment is rising in new economy, whereas it is falling in the old economy.
Yeah.
Sir, how will this dilemma of old versus new will pan out? So how do we see it panning out?
Well, I think this is kind of irreversible. I mean, if you want to take a global advantage example, I mean, you pick up the company with the companies with the largest capitalization. They're not manufacturing. At one time, it used to be General Electric and stuff like that. They are way down now. So that is telling you about the shape of things to come. And I think realizing this, I think Mr. Ambani also moved from to a new oil, which is data and not petroleum products. So I think so. This is going to, the times are changing. The kind of changes that are taking place in the overall system, I think is changing the complexion of the old economy itself. I mean, in the sense that manufacturing also is becoming more very different now. I think people are talking about 3D printing and stuff like that. It's not talking about, it's already happening. And which means I think that I don't have, if I want to export, I don't have to necessarily produce it here. I can send the software out and it can be printed or produced anywhere in the world. So I think these changes, I believe, are not going to be reversed. By old economy, we mean the brick and mortar economy, which automobile itself is changing. So the automobile will remain, but it will be a very different animal. I mean, completely. So it means that the paraphernalia around combustion engine driven car is very different from a electric engine driven car. Electric engine doesn't have too many parts. It doesn't have a combustion engine. It can be repair and maintenance is very low in that. Here, I think there is a full, so I mean, everything is under transformation. I mean, that's the point I wanted to make. And I think some part, the technology part is growing much faster than the rest. So I think it will, I think the dichotomy between these two will keep growing. And we have to train our manpower so that they can take advantage of this dichotomy that is taking place. Otherwise, I think we will have an unemployable army of labor sitting somewhere. I mean, So I don't see this getting bridged. It's just that the relevance of one is becoming overpowering the relevance of other. Other is still relevant, I mean, but I mean, if I don't know how you want to view it. I mean, from the market's perspective or the valuation perspective, even guys like the investors, astute investors like Warren Buffett, who used to never look at Apple. I think he's making most of his money. So it's everybody is attuning themselves to the changing reality. So this is given. I mean, so you'll have to. I don't see this dichotomy bridging. It's going to continue.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I would like to ask you one more question, sir. Sir, this year's budget would practically be the last budget because, sir, a practical budget, because next year will be a populist budget, sir. Sir, and every year, Dhanuka sir takes 2 classes to simplify the budget for us. And on the budget day, he does a budget analysis session for us in the evening. So, sir, what are your expectations from budgets this year?
I think, I don't know, we kind of over glorify the budget. I think budget doesn't require that kind of importance that it is given. I think in most countries, you don't even hear about it. I mean, you just, I think even the Britishers have stopped giving it. I think it's the media which has created so much of noise around it. But I think having said that, the reality is that people do look up to the budget for a number of things. And my sense is that I think the 3 things at a very macro level. One, I think they have to give a very clear path of how they are going to reduce the deficit, because government is still government is the spender of last resort. As long as the COVID situation is there, government will have to keep supporting the economy. So which means that they will have to run a deficit which is higher than what they would have liked to run. And but they at the same time, they also need to bring it down. Second dilemma or the choice for the government is, do they want to support growth over the medium run, or do they also want to support the economy currently? If you just invest, I think if you're talking only of electric vehicles, so you're talking of, I mean, a little future, I think, which is going to play out. Or if you're talking of reforms, they pay off after 3 years, 4 years. I think GST only paid off last year. That is why GST collections are so good. Now, so they have to balance. Their objective so far has been that we will invest and we will not spend money on subsidies, etc. We'll reduce it, but we'll spend money on investment. But what the pandemic does is, or any calamity does, is that the need to support the parts of the economy who cannot run on their own, I think becomes very important. And that's what rest of the world has done. So they have to do a fine balancing act. So they have to keep the focus on overall investments. At the same time, choose very carefully which part of the economy needs support and support them. Because see, it's like a bridge. I think bridge from the short run to the medium run. If the bridge is not there, how will you reach the medium run? So many businesses, the small, medium enterprises, they are in pretty bad shape. I think the bigger guys, the bigger corporates were able to raise money from the bond markets at a very cheap price. I mean, it's whereas the smaller guys were struggling. So this is the story. And so what I'm trying to say is that you need to support this segment for some more time. Although I think the bigger will become bigger, we all know, I mean, which is already happening. So I think so that is the second focus. The third focus of the budget should be on reducing, I think, the tariffs. I would say, I think some taxes that they had raised on fuel, etc. I think which is not doing any good. I mean, it is actually very harmful for the economy. When diesel prices rise, lead to an all-round increase in cost. The transportation becomes expensive, goods become expensive. So I think they should depend less on oil taxes. I think if they reduce the taxes on oil, I think that will give a fillip to the economy. And by the way, fuel prices hurt poor more than they hurt the rich. So this is also, I think, very clearly visible in the government's own data.
Thank you so much.
Just these 3 things.
Can Can question now?
I invite Nidhi Kanoi.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
For India to reach 5 trillion, we still need 2.4 trillion more. So where do you expect this 2.4 trillion to come from? Agriculture, services, manufacturing, like you mentioned, or the new age economies?
I think, so you have to tell me 5 trillion by when? Because most politicians are getting away with this 5 trillion. I think our commerce minister also says 1 trillion of exports, and the year keeps changing every second day. I mean, so
I would say 25. So
you can't reach that. I think so. I think that's a goal which we should not be pursuing, because you already lost 1 year because of the pandemic. And for reaching 5 trillion, either the rupee has to become 40, because this is in dollars. I think this is not even a good objective to run after, because it doesn't make sense. I mean, you want if GDP of India rises just because the currency has appreciated, I mean, will it do any help? And it won't help. So you should be focused on real growth. I mean, how is the economy moving ahead? So that is number one. Now coming to the mechanics of it, if you want to reach 5 trillion by 25, then you have to grow at something like 12 to 13% per annum minimum. Which is very difficult. I mean, I would say it doesn't look like to me. Yeah, somebody said 5 trillion by 27. That is possible. That I think you can 26, 27. You can reach. What will fire it? Of course, agriculture will not fire it, because agriculture typically grows at 3 to 4%. I think if you have a very good run, it will grow at 4%. So it is going to grow slower than the economy. What is going to raise the share in GDP is either manufacturing or services. Till now, I think in the last 20 years, the services have been the key driver. They have grown faster than manufacturing. Now government is trying to push itself towards manufacturing. And I mean, I can't say for sure whether that situation will emerge. I think I'm not 100% sure, because all the previous attempts of the government to push manufacturing haven't succeeded. Manufacturing share in GDP is stuck at 17, 18%. So if they make a breakthrough there, then I think you have some scope there. But I would say that services will remain a dominant component. I think there is, I think, because that is where, whether it is the exports, I think the most buoyant part of our exports is the service sector exports, which is the IT, ITS, I mean, which is still doing quite well. I mean, so I would still put my money on services, but I would see the share of share of agriculture is going down, share of services is going up. But now I think I would say that the share of manufacturing will try to balance out the share of services to some extent. I think that's the broad path that I can't put numbers to it, I think.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
The Nidhi was from our Mumbai chapter.
I see.
Same city as yours.
Okay.
Okay, Lalita, please come in with your question.
Yeah. Before asking a question, I must thank you, sir, for giving my daughter, Neha Duggar Saraf, who worked under you for 3 years at CRISIL.
Yes, she did. I mean, let me also tell you, she's a very brilliant analyst. I mean, and I think she's doing very well. She'll continue to do very well. One of the best persons who has worked in CRISIL, I mean, in my team at least.
I am a mother, Lalita Duggar, but I am here today to thank our mentors, Sanjay sir and Bhuwania sir. All because of him only, we are all here to talk to you. Otherwise, we would not have been there. They have given us financial literacy to be independent and to be in front of you.
No, that's really, I mean, I was trying to read up the website just to understand. So I got a sense that you people are very well aware. I mean, because you go to Omaha, I mean, you met many people, and all sorts of people. I think celebrities have spoken to you, so you're already very well aware. I mean, so I was just trying to gauge. But I think so. I wasn't sure how much value will I add to you people.
No, you. I mean, but our sirs have given us a lot, so that at least we can talk in front of you and at least listen to you. What you say, it makes sense to us now.
Thank you so much, Lalita. Thank you so much, sir. Can we take one more question from Beena?
Yeah, please.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Beena from the Bangalore chapter of Millennium Mams. Sir, the economic recovery has been uneven. And when we read about gross capital formation, there's constant mention of less private investment and less private consumption, some of which you did talk about. Please, could you help us understand this better? And what will it take for to get the economy firing on all cylinders?
Yeah, so I think, as I said earlier, I think whenever a calamity takes place, I think, or there is a like global financial crisis, Lehman crisis in the US, I think the government has to take over. The private sector becomes very risk averse. They don't want to do anything. So during such times, government has a bigger role to play. And that is one of the reasons that government is supporting the economy via more investments. I think, although I think they have slowed down a bit, but still government is the key force behind investments. Now, as far as the private sector is concerned, it's going to take some time. Now, there are two things. I mean, are you capable of investing, or are you willing to invest? So I think capability part is satisfied. That condition is satisfied because the larger corporates are sitting on good amount of money. They can raise cheaper money. They are also enjoying better capacity utilization. If I give you an example of steel, in the steel sector, the largest 5 companies, they are enjoying capacity utilization of above 80%. But if I look at the lower, smaller companies, their capacity utilization is only 65%. Yes, so I think who can invest? I think the larger one who has a market share, I think he's in a better position to invest. So why corporate sector is cautious is because of 2-3 things. One is uncertainty, I think, which also comes from COVID to some extent. The second factor is that during the previous 2 booms in the Indian economy, the one boom I remember is from 2003 to 2007, which is the pre-Lehman crisis. Yes, at that time, I think the private investments were very, very buoyant. And everybody was, I think, talking of 9 to 10% growth in India. That was the, after that came the global financial crisis and the growth dipped. But it again picked up. As I said, the plucking effect of the guitar, it played out. And then because government gave the stimulus, the economy also stayed high. And then again, same thing happened. The private sector again thought that, well, this was a blip and we are back to what we experienced during 2003 to 2007. And they again invested. So they ended up with over-investing in the economy. So the non-performing assets in the Indian economy are not merely because of poor investment decisions by the banks. It's also because I think the bullishness was on the higher side, and they took, I would say, they made incorrect decision. I mean, of investing to that amount. I mean, and then the growth slipped and everything started turning non. So this time around, I think they'll be very careful. I mean, that's my sense. I think having learned 2 times, they will very carefully tread the path. And that is why government has to invest in infrastructure. The more government creates infrastructure, the private sector will become more confident that it can do its business. The cost of doing business will become lower. So I think there is a positive effect of government infrastructure investment on the private sector, which is seen all over the world. I think so. That is why I think government still will have to hold the reins, I mean, of investment. And maybe by 2023, I think private investment will also start coming back. And the PLI scheme is showing some success, I mean, particularly for the electronics and phone manufacturing, etc.
Thank you so much, sir. So now I invite Namita Mohanka for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Preeti. To be sure, the market may defy the underlying fundamentals in the short term, but it moves in sync with the economy in the long run. And that makes a strong case for long-term investors to keep track of some of the key economic indicators. And so who better than Mr. Joshi himself to help us make sense of these turbulent times. We can't thank you enough, sir, for coming to our forum and sharing your insights and answering all our queries from the budget to the agriculture to when we're going to achieve the 5 trillion economy. The list was endless. Thank you, Priyanka, for facilitating this meeting with Mr. Joshi. Your initiative has benefited us immensely. And no forum is enough to express our gratitude for our mentors. Without your guidance, sirs, we wouldn't be here. And to all the ladies at this meeting, you are the strength of the organization. Thank you for your attendance and see you soon.